Ecology. What we have here are pictures of peppered moths. On the left, you can see a dark peppered moth and a much lighter peppered moth. You can see it actually in the lower left corner. And they are sitting on tree bark with a bunch of lichen on it. On the right is much more darkened tree bark. This is from soot from factories. Now, if you're a bird, it's going to be easier to see the black one against the unpolluted tree there. And that's what's going to eat. And guess what? The one that's better camouflaged will continue to procreate. It's less likely to be eaten. However, with sudden changes in the environment, such as the soot from factories, from burning coal, the darkened moth is now better camouflaged. The light one's easier to eat and be seen by birds. So the darker one will have more offspring because it is not being eaten as often. This is the basis of ecology.
Hello, welcome to Ecology. One of the earliest aspects of ecology was seeing how the environment changes, causing changes in living things. On the left, we have the speckled moth, a light one and a dark one. You can see the light one is difficult to see against the bark. The black one is very easy to see. However, as pollution increased because of coal burning in the 1860s and 1870s, the black one is more difficult to see because of the soot from the factories. On the flip side, the white one was more readily seen. And if you're a bird, you're going to hunt the ones that's most easy to see. This is how ecology changes things evolutionary-wise.
It's based on genetics we were talking about in 2 lectures ago. These genetics, whether it's dark-colored, light-colored, blue-eyed, brown-eyed, blonde-haired, brown-haired, is what's carried on our genes, and those that procreate will pass on those genes. Those that do not procreate because they've been eaten will not pass on those genes, and this is why the ecology is based closely on the genetics. Phenotype is what it looks like, whether the bear is brown or black, or whether the hair is blonde or brown or eyes are blue or green. That's the phenotype. The genotype is what the genes it carries. It may look blue, but if it carries blue and brown, it has both those genes and can pass some of those other genes on.
These are called Punnett squares. As we were talking about DNA last week, you have 2 sets of chromosomes. In this case, when you're looking at peas, one of the first ones that was documented like this, big R being round, little r being wrinkled. If you mixed a solid round one with a wrinkled one, they would all look round. That's called the phenotype, what it looks like. But they each carry a big R and little r. That's called the genotype. If you mix a little r with little r, as you see on the very right, all you use little r's. If you mix a big R that has little r with it, you got a 75% chance of getting a phenotype that looks like a big R, round. 25% chance of little r. But of that 75% chance that has in the middle, big R, little r, they each carry the wrinkled genes as well. So if they subsequently mate, they can create their own wrinkled as well.
Now, all ecology is supported by life, and all life is supported by the sun. The sun has light that sends down to plants. The plants use chlorophyll to turn the sunlight into sugar, sucrose, glucose, galactose. But it's the process of chlorophyll creating photosynthesis that allows all life to exist. And it's creating sunlight into sugar.
Quick note here that all living things depend on chlorophyll. Chlorophyll creates sugar, sucrose, glucose, galactose, fructose, and that's where all things get energy. Plant eaters eat plants, meat eaters eat animals. All the energy is derived from the chlorophyll ultimately.
99% of all life on this earth is created through, supported by photosynthesis, but about 1% is created by chemosynthesis. On the left here are deep in the water, in the oceans. There are little volcanoes called black smokers because there's little black smoke coming out of them. It's actually lava and chemicals. They're about 4 or 5 feet tall. But they've learned there's sunlight so far down there, as you'll see in a couple classes from now, that no light can get there, no photosynthesis. But these living things are surviving based on the chemicals in those black smokers. And this is called chemosynthesis based on chemistry. If there's life anywhere in our solar system, I think it might be on Jupiter's moon Europa, which has an icy ocean and all these colors underneath. They think it's far enough from the sun. It may not have photosynthesis, but there's all these colors, and they can tell the ice is moving, which means there's a warm ocean underneath, over 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and they think this may be chemosynthesis going on there.
It should be noted that deep in the ocean, where the sunlight does not reach, there is another way to create energy that is consumed, and that's chemosynthesis. On the left are black smokers. These are small volcanoes that are erupting in the ocean. There's living things around it that live off the chemistry from these black smokers, where no light gets in. Similarly, on Europa, Jupiter's moon, they see all kinds of different colors out there, and they think there's life under there, which is ice over an ocean. They're probably using chemosynthesis as well. Too far from the sun to generate much photosynthesis, but they could be using chemicals underneath.
We call ecology. There are consumers. There's a deer consuming grass, and some wolves trying to consume a deer.
Consumers, that's pretty self-explanatory. On the left, we have a deer consuming grass, which has sugar in it. Chlorophyll created it. On the right, we have some wolves eating a deer, still getting that sugar from that deer that got it from the grass.
They're scavengers. As gross as some may feel they are, we need scavengers to break down all our dead things. Vultures on the left eating a dead animal, and then these are termites on the right here. Now, termites can only eat dead wood. They cannot eat live wood. Now, they may be a scourge to people in homes, but in the forest, we need those termites to break down all the dead trees.
Scavengers, which decompose things. On the left, we got vultures, and on the right, we got termites. Should we know that termites do not eat live wood? They can only digest dead wood, actually.
Decomposers are similar scavengers, except they break down the most simple components. Fungus is one, and then here's sewage here, breaking down by microorganisms into simpler components, including the methane as well.
Decomposers, which break down the basic chemical elements. Where scavengers pick things apart, making them smaller, decomposers actually change it. Fungus and the sewage treatment plant, which is bacteria, actually changing the chemical structure of a lot of the products they are digesting.
Then there's mixotrophs. Here's a Venus flytrap here, and it uses chlorophyll to grow, but it also gets additional nutrients by capturing insects through its Venus flytrap head, which closes down on an insect.
Mixotrophs. These use chlorophyll and get energy from other means. It's a Venus flytrap eating a fly. As you can see, it's green on the outside where it gets energy from the sun from chlorophyll, but it also gets its nutrients by eating flies and other bugs.
The trophic levels are where the energy goes. We need our decomposers because the decomposers have all the nutrients for the plants to create photosynthesis. The herbivores are the first generation that eat the plants. There's carnivores that eat these herbivores. And then there's top carnivores, such as an eagle or a wolf, or for all practical terms, humans as well. And as you go up the pyramid, there's fewer and fewer of each one of these groups. There's more plants in our herbivores. There's more carnivores. There's more herbivores in our carnivores, and there's even fewest top carnivores.
Trophic levels. This is where energy gets derived from. Soils and decomposers will give energy to the plants, which are eaten by the herbivores, primary consumers, carnivores, smaller ones, which eat the herbivores, and the top carnivores, which eat secondary carnivores.
Predation is hunting one animal by another.
Predation. This is simply something hunting something else.
There's parasitism. Here, these are sea lampreys on a salmon, which has been scourged in the Great Lakes.
Parasitism. These are things that live off other things, literally. These are lampreys here, they're very ancient fish. It slowly sucks the inside out of other fishes. A parasite cannot survive without the host, which is what this fish is. Leeches are the same way, so are ticks. However, it should be known that a perfect parasite does not hurt the host. And by the way, these are not perfect parasites.
There's herbivore, means only plants, such as Galapagos turtle here.
Herbivory simply means herbs, eating plants, like this tortoise here is.
There's competition as well. Competition among, in the same territory. There's a lion fighting two hyenas over food. And hyenas can hunt, but they'd prefer to steal. So they're both competing over the same food. More than likely the lion has killed this food, but the hyena's going to try to take it from it.
Competition usually occurs when you've got two species wanting the same thing in one habitat. Best example here is a lion with two hyenas. Interestingly, two hyenas can kill one lion. However, two lions can kill three hyenas, always competing with each other. Hyenas can hunt, but normally they'd rather steal from a lion, so it is a never-ending competition going back and forth between the two.
There's mutualism. This is very similar to parasitism, except both benefit. The bee needs the nectar from the flower, and the flower needs the bee because it cannot walk or move. The flower needs the bee to move the pollen to pollinate and basically fertilize another plant. So it's mutualistic and help each other.
Mutualism. This is perfect parasitism, perfect parasites. The bee needs the nectar from the flower so it can survive. However, the flower needs the bee to move the pollen around so it can pollinate other plants so they can flower. Similar examples are E. coli in our intestine. The E. coli needs a safe place to live. They live in our intestine, but we need the E. coli to digest.
Commensalism. These are remoras, also known as shark suckers, sitting and sucking on the side of a shark with a little suction cup. They don't do any benefit for the shark, but basically no one's going to want to mess with the shark and bother these remoras with the shark so close.
Commensalism. These remoras, also known as shark suckers, live around the shark. They don't do anything for the shark other than eat bits of scrap, but they're protected because no one wants to eat a remora when there's a shark next to it.
Within ecology, we have our niche, or a niche, as I say it, a niche versus the habitat. A niche, or a niche, is what the organism does. The habitat is where they live. For example, a beaver lives in a beaver dam. Its niche is it cuts down trees and blocks rivers, which can create lakes, which is not a bad thing. A bird lives, a robin lives in a nest. Its niche is to eat bugs and other worms.
A niche versus the habitat. The niche is what the animal does. The habitat is where it lives. Don't confuse the two. The beaver may live in a beaver dam, and that's its habitat, but its niche is cutting down trees and damming up rivers. Similarly, the wolf, it may live in the forest, that's its habitat, but its niche is to hunt other herbivores like deer and rabbit.
We have interspecific competition. This is competition between two of the same species. Lions and hyenas are different species. These are two eagles. They are competing against each other for territory. The average eagle needs 400 square miles of territory to survive for hunting for food, which is 20 miles by 20 miles. If there's two eagles in the same territory, there's not going to be enough food. So there are interspecific among species, same species.
Interspecific competition is when two creatures of the same species are fighting for one territory. These two eagles, as I wrote below here, the average eagle has 400 square miles of territory. It cannot afford to have two within that territory. They're both eating the same food. There's only enough for one eagle. So when one sees another one, they make it go away or fight for it.
Interspecific here between a cheetah and a lion. These often happen on biome borders. We'll talk about biomes in a little bit. These are basically different geographical habitats. Lions actually live in savannas, and cheetahs actually do live in tropical rainforest jungle areas. So on these borders, we often have competition.
Interspecific competition. These are different species competing in the same area. Usually have them at biomes. Contrary to what Disney tells you, the lions do not live in the tropical areas or the jungles. They actually live in the savannas. Cheetahs live in those tropical areas. On that border between a tropical area, a jungle, and a savanna is we're going to have interspecific competition like this. Normally they won't run into each other, but at that border they may.
Other methods of survival in ecology include mimicry, mimicking something else so it's not eaten. Here's a bee fly. It looks like a bee. I wouldn't touch it. Like it's stung, but it's actually a fly. We got a leaf insect, like a walking stick, and this actually, if you look, it looks like a leaf. If you were a bird, you couldn't tell that was an actual insect. The polyphemus moth. It's a moth, but it looks like eyes. If you're a bird flying nearby, you see its wings spread, you think those are big eyes, bigger than you, it might eat you. Such as the scarlet king snake as well. This looks like a coral snake, and animals are going to think twice about touching it, even though it's perfectly harmless.
Mimicry. These are survival means. On the left, you have a bee fly. It looks just like a bee. If you're ever stung by a bee, you won't touch this thing again, will you? Even though it's actually a fly, it won't sting you. Looks so similar, that's what most animals think. Leaf insect. If you look at it, looks just like a leaf. These are related to walking sticks, which are also insects. And if you've ever seen them in real life, it does look like a stick. The polyphemus moth. Large moth, about 6 inches across, and they are here in Atlanta. But if you're a bird hunting a moth and you see these dots, they look like eyes of a bird bigger than themselves or some other creature, so they fly away. Don't even think. And the scarlet king snake on the very right. This is poisonous, but looks like a coral snake, which is extremely poisonous. The average animal or human is not going to get a chance touching this thing because it looks so close.
Another defense within ecology is by plants, especially eccentric plant compounds. On the left here, a lot of poisonous plants. You eat it, you're not going to eat any more of them because often they'll die. You've got the belladonna plant, Jimson weed, henbane, mistletoe even. You see at Christmas. You got castor bean, which is not a true bean, but it can be made to make poisons. There's ergot. Ergot is a fungus that grows on wheat. It actually has the same hallucinogenic properties as LSD. There's also tobacco. It has nicotine. Very few animals, many, can eat nicotine because it's a poison.
Secondary plant compounds are another ecological way of defense. Noxious plants here. These are all poisonous plants, including mistletoe, belladonna, mandrake, Jimson weed, which grows in your yard. Don't eat it. Ergot on rye. This is actually the LSD derivative, believe it or not. And tobacco, which contains nicotine. Most creatures cannot eat tobacco leaves because they have so many noxious chemicals within them, even raw.
Now, we talk about succession, and that is the continued growth and expansion of all living things in the area of the ecology. This is Mount St. Helens, which is in Washington State, prior to the 1980 eruption. It did erupt.
This is Mount St. Helens, prior to the eruption in Washington State in 1980.
And this is what it looked like 1 year later. You can see the same lake there. It's covered with soot. It's all black. And scientists thought it'd be hundreds of years before it recovered. However,
this is 1 year later.
a thing called succession takes place. First, you have little grasses and funguses that would grow back in 1983. Saw small plants starting to come back. And then by 2004, there were trees coming back. This is called succession. It came back much sooner than I thought it would.
And you can see over the years how it has come back fairly quickly. They thought it might take hundreds of years. Look at 2004, where it's at now.
Climax Community is what the high point of any living ecological community. More often, it's where we have hardwoods more than anything else. It takes hundreds of years to grow. And this creates a shade and canopy for many other types of living things.
Climax Community is where the community has reached its apex of how it will grow. For example, right here we have hardwoods that are probably a couple hundred years old, oak trees, large pines. This will be the peak of where a forest will be, for example, and the animals within it.
We have diversity within because the DNA of different with meiosis causing different things, and they all play a part in our ecological community, having their little niche, having their little jobs to do. The tarsier is one of the most ancient marsupials. It actually is in the monkey family. You can see little hands and feet. The dwarf canary dwarf mantis. You get Tasmanian devil here in the upper right, and my river turtle. They all are alive and all can exist because of their need and their niche within their ecological community.
Species diversity. All these are unique species, as are all living things on the face of the earth. Every one of them has a role to play. While they may look strange or different, they have survived because they serve a purpose ecologically. Sometimes we don't know yet.
One of the great studies that happened about 20 years ago is in Yellowstone, where there were no living wolves. They're all hunted to extinction locally about 100 years ago. And they've been there for hundreds of thousands of years. So several scientists reintroduced 2 families of 30 wolves. And one of the first things that happened, was, they hunt elk. And the elk, which used to eat all the willow trees, young willow, they love the young willows. They're soft, tasty, and delicious. Well, once the wolves came, the elk had to go hide within the woods more. They couldn't eat these willow trees, which actually grew along the riverbanks. This is where it gets interesting. Now the willows weren't being eaten, they got bigger and bigger. This brought beavers back. Beavers love cutting down willows for dams. As they started damming rivers back up, this created lakes, and this brought all kinds of other wildlife, including bears, swans, more salmon. And what's interesting is that by the reintroduction of the wolf, which was a natural predator for the elk, it created all kinds of other animals because the beavers now could use these trees to make dams, which affected everything.
This one will take a while for me to go through, but it is pretty interesting. About 100 years ago, they'd wiped out the last of the wolves in Yellowstone National Park. And the elk were proliferate. They were just continuing to eat and grow and have more babies, and eat and grow, have more babies, which there's nothing wrong with. So scientists decided to release 2 families of 20 wolves back into it because they were there for hundreds of thousands of years to see what would happen. Interestingly enough, the first thing that happened is the elk would not hang out so freely. They had to hide among the trees now. Why is that important? Well, the elk's favorite food was the willows, young willows. Willows are less than a year old. The willows never got big because the elk are always eating them, especially the young ones. Well, once the willows started growing, beavers came back. Beavers love large willows to make beaver dams. What does that do? That blocks up rivers. Now, instead of streams, they had lakes because the beavers creating lakes, blocking up rivers. This brought back salmon, this brought back swans, this brought back bears. So, by hunting out the wolves 100 years ago and allowing the elk to proliferate, we were destroying other ecological niches. And once the brought the predator back of the wolves, everything got balanced again. Actually, more species than there were before.
We can talk about genetically modified foods. Some people are against it, but we had Mexican Americans about 2,000 years ago that were actually taking teosinte, which is a type of grass, and that had 2 to 3 or 5 to 12 hard kernels of corn. Corn is actually a grass, and they'd breed it with other grass, teosintes, that had large kernels. Before you knew it, they were creating a special kind of grass that were 12 inches long with 5 kernels, our corn we have today.
Most people do not realize this, but corn is actually part of the grass family. Native Americans actually kept breeding corn, the first genetically modified food. So they got more and more and more kernels on it. The teosinte, which is the grass it derived from, had 5 to 10 kernels on it. Well, they kept breeding larger ones, and before you know it, we actually had corn being created.
Ecological diversity. We've got 6 different ecological areas, each with different environments, different animals with different niches. This isn't, say, Wisconsin. And this is all over the world. And this is just one small area to show you the diversity we have in ecology.
Ecological diversity varies quite a bit, even in the state. Here's the different ecological diversities based on climates in Wisconsin.
With ecology, with mankind encroaching in many areas, we also have problems with habitat destruction. One of the worst ones is strip mining.
Habitat destruction, when we destroy the natural habitat of where living things are. Prime example of this is strip mining here in the Appalachian Mountains.
There's fragmentation often with forestry, which mainly some of the forest, but it does destroy a lot of the environment and the niches of the animals living there.
Fragmentation. We don't destroy the entire environment, but bits and pieces of it. You can see where this entire area was covered with forest. We've cut swaths of it now. And now living things can live like this.
Invasive species, where a species does better well than it does in the original area, such as kudzu, which originally came from Japan 100 years ago. It can kill plants here because it covers their own native leaves, which cannot absorb chlorophyll because they're covered by the kudzu.
Invasive species. This here is kudzu right here in Atlanta. Kudzu is an invasive species because it is not naturally occurring here and out promotes everything else around it, killing everything else around it.
Overpopulation. This is in the district border areas of Mexico City. Many countries have many cities like this, which has higher pollution, lower medical care, lower income, and lower health.
Overpopulation. We're going to study more of this in the following modules. But overpopulation, here's an example here in the border area of Mexico City. Problem with overpopulation is you have a lot of people close together, limited sanitation, limited sewers, limited water, and more likely very limited medical help. So you get a lot of people sick in a close area with very low amounts of money and difficult to get help.
This also creates pollution, which affects all areas, all people, all living things.
Pollution. Prime example happens when you do have overpopulation, and this occurs everywhere.
Now I talk about survival of things. We have survival tables here. These are for insurance, and as you can see, for life insurance, the younger you are, the cheaper the insurance is. Well, there's less people in human beings are less likely to die when you're younger compared to when you're older. They'll have to pay out more likely when you're older.
Survival tables. This is a life insurance table, but we see it with car insurance, homeowners insurance. Our insurance is based on survival. And the only thing I want you to get out of this here, because we're going to the next slide to make more sense in a moment, is why is insurance cheaper when you're younger for life insurance? Because few young people die. But the older you get, the more likely you will die. That's why insurance for someone at age 30 is $2,400 a year for life insurance. And that would be for $2 million. Age 60 is $22,000 a year. These are survival curves, and you'll see next slide. They don't occur only in humans; they occur in all living things.
We have these same tables for all living things. There are 3 types of survivorship curves. Type 1, humans are type. This is where most babies survive. Most adults survive. Most people die when they're elderly. Type 2 are like plants. Like birds. Equal amount of eggs are eaten by their animals, equal amount of young ones are eaten, equal amount of adults are eaten. In type 3, most of the babies die, and very few go to adulthood. A good example of this would be, oak trees. It could probably create 10,000 acorns every year, and most are eaten by animals. Well, those are its seeds, those are its babies, and majority of them are eaten, and all living things create enough babies, enough offspring, so that another one can go on. So it probably lives 200 years, 200 times 10,000 would be about 2 million acorns. That's another one can go on eventually.
Survival curves for humans, they're type 1. As you can see, how long do they survive? Most babies survive well into adulthood. And when do you die? When you're old. That's a type 1. Type 2 are birds. The eggs are eaten, the young are eaten, the adults are eaten. When they're old, they're eaten. They're eaten all the time. Type 3 are such as oak trees. Keep in mind, each acorn is a baby. 99.9% of those are eaten or never turn in our tree. Only 1% do. So the whole point of this is that very few survive and only one goes on.
And this rate of reproduction is called fecundity. Humans have low fecundity. Here's a deer. Low number of offspring. Elephants have low fecundity. Now, high fecundity is like the spider, which has 1,000 babies. That is high fecundity. Most insects have high fecundity. Most do not survive. Higher likelihood of survival for the offspring is low fecundity. High fecundity, most of the offspring will die pretty quickly.
Fecundity is the number of offspring you produce. Humans, like this deer, have low fecundity. They have relatively few babies, offspring, at any one time. This spider on the right has hundreds of baby spiders. High fecundity.